Today's podcast is an interview with Rich Allen, who's the founder of Tour de Profit. Tour de Profit is an organization that really focuses on igniting teams, engaging people in teams, and also really helping clients to hire the right people. So, if you're managing a team, if you're leading a team, if you're in the process of hiring people to a new team, then this is really going to be important for you because you will understand a bit about the process of going about hiring them, but also once you hire them, how you engage them, and also the importance of culture in that. So I think the three things you'll take from this is really the importance of the vision and how important it is. This is not just some sort of nebulous conversation. It's really important that people understand the vision and the purpose of the organization or the division of the organization that they're working for, but also understand the culture of the organization that they're joining and what is expected of them in terms of behavior. And the third thing you learn about is a really interesting approach they have, and quite a different approach they have to hiring and the process they go through to hiring, where they hire for fit in terms of culture primarily, and then work towards kind of the skills and the knowledge piece down the road. So there is a long process and really interesting process to do that, and the impact or attention. So head over to the interview with Rich. I think you really get an awful lot from it, and I think that you will benefit from that, and certainly you will get some nuggets to take away to help you to ignite your team. Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast, a gentleman that I've really been looking forward to having here on the show. He is Rich Allen. He hails from Frisco in Texas. And Rich, you're very welcome here today.
Thanks, John. So glad to be with you this morning.
And we will get to talk about why there is a bike hanging behind you and that you're not sitting on it, but we will get to actually talking about that. But, you're all about kind of igniting teams and transforming businesses. Maybe you might give everybody just a little bit of a taste of kind of your background and how you've got to where you are now.
Be glad to, John. Yeah, I actually grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, one of 12 children in a fairly large family. So as you can imagine, my dad worked many, many jobs just to make ends meet and try to take care of the family. And when my dad was 34 years old, he made probably the boldest decision of his life, and he made a decision to quit his jobs and actually start his own business. And John, my dad had this dream. He had this vision. He wanted to build a business and leave a legacy for his 12 children. And so my dad started this window washing business. And while he was really great at window washing, my dad didn't have a clue how to run a business. And so for years, he just struggled, just on and on. It was a train wreck virtually every day. And my dad had this belief that if you just worked harder, things would get better. And his team was made up of non-paid employees, his kids, right? We were basically slave labor. And one at a time, we only had to do this for a while. And then we realized, there was probably a better life out there somewhere, and it wasn't doing what we were doing with our dad. So one at a time we left. In fact, one of my brothers left to go start his own window washing business to compete with my dad, which was kind of interesting. But I had a lucky break, and I got a chance to go to college. And so I went into college, went into the military for a time, and then I moved into a corporate job. So I lived my life in the corporate world all the time, looking back at my father and just thinking, what could I have done to help him make this business work better? So I became a student of business and how business worked and how you motivated teams and how you got people to really do the hard work of the business for the owner. And that's kind of what propelled me to do what I do today.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? I mean, it's curious because my father was self-employed, and a bit like your own, perhaps does not get the success that he would have liked or even that we would have liked. We got educated and we never went without. So, but I suppose going into the corporate world, did you have a sense in the corporate world when you looked back at what your father had done that you felt some sort of entrepreneurial spirit kind of tickling away inside of you, and that you kind of thought, gosh, I wonder, could I do that, or would I do that, or did that just not enter your head?
No, it always did, John. I was always wondering, I think I didn't realize it was an entrepreneurial bug. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to try my hand at running a business. I wanted to see if it was really as hard as it appeared to be. And very honestly, I was with some very good corporate organizations, but I saw managers who weren't very good at running their part of the business. They weren't very good at motivating people. They really didn't get how to inspire and get the teams to do the work that they needed to do. And I always thought, and so I ended up in a coaching role in a way inside the company. And I thought to myself, wow, I could do this. But I worked for a technology firm, so I went and talked to the CEO at one point, and he said, look, you don't have an engineering degree. There's no way I'm letting you touch one of our wafer fabs, which was, a fairly expensive business enterprise. So I ended up leaving the technology firm and ended up going to work for a small company called Pella Corporation. They made windows, a window company based in Iowa, with the agreement that if things went well, they'd let me run a business. And so that's how I got to cut my teeth on running a business.
So your decision then to move out of the corporate world to do what you're doing now, what was the catalyst for that?
It's an interesting story, John, and I won't make it too long, but I had this about 3 years into my assignment with this window company. We had an opportunity to buy a company. So we bought a small manufacturing firm, about $30 million business, about 200 plus employees. And it was my opportunity to run it. So my boss came in, gave me a key and said, Rich, here's your shot. Take it on. And that's where the bike came from. So that's the story that led me to the bike. But through that experience, I ran that business for about 7 years. And at the end of that, what I found was I was working a lot in the business. In fact, I was working so much I was never home. And you have daughters, I know, John. So my youngest daughter at the time was 7 years old. And I remember coming home one day from a trip that I was always gone on trips. And I came home and my daughter said, I wanted to read her a book. She wouldn't let me. And he said, you're not my dad, you're my uncle. And she had demoted me from father to uncle because I was just never around. That was the impetus. That was the catalyst to say, okay, it's time. I'm going to go do this on my own.
Okay. So, you got to tell the story about the bike.
Okay. So here's the story on the bike. But, when I got the opportunity to run the business, I was thrilled. I'd wanted to do this for years, and here was my opportunity. So we moved my family to Minnesota, and then I went down to the factory. I walked into the factory, and John, I was scared to death. I had no clue what I was going to do to get the business better. And I walked around for weeks just meeting people. And what I saw was that people they were just there doing their job. They were just clocking in, doing the minimum they needed to do to get a paycheck, leaving on Friday, heading to the bar, right? Spending their weekend doing whatever. And so they were in this loop of doing nothing. And I wanted to find a way to really energize and motivate them. And so I had this idea one morning, right? Where do all great ideas hit you? Right? In the shower, right? So I was in the shower. And I had this great idea. I called my admin that morning and said, call a meeting. I know what we're going to do. And so we cleared out a part of the warehouse, and I brought this bike that I was riding at the time. I brought it in, put it on a table at the front of the room, got everybody's attention, and I said, what's this? And they all looked at me like I'd lost my mind. They thought, okay, they sent me a nutcase to run this business. And I said, look, this, and some people said it was a bike. A couple of guys in the back of the room said it was stolen property. I convinced them it was my bike. But I said, look, this isn't a bike. This is our business. And if we could understand how our business is like this bike, we can tune up our business and make it go really fast. So I took them on a lap around the bike and showed them that every component of a bike relates to a critical element of a business. And it was like, John, it was like magic. At the moment, everybody, for the first time, realized how a business truly worked. And so after the meeting, they all came up to me and said, I know what's wrong with our bike. I know where we're sticking. I know what's flat. I know what's loose, what needs to be tuned up. And we started to work on it as if it were a bike. 7 years later, we took that $30 million business to about $150 million in revenue, and we owned the top end of our product category, and it was all getting people to understand where they were and what aspect they were working on in the business using a bike.
And do you think, was it the whole kind of imagery and the story of the bike, was it the fact that, all of the bike, all the moving parts are connected to each other? What was it about that story, about the bike, that actually got people to actually understand the business, but not so much understand the business? Because in my experience, people kind of logically understand it, but if they don't emotionally engage with it, then you've only done, a quarter of the job.
Right. I would say, John, that the biggest thing that I noticed was, and I'd seen a little bit of my predecessor before he left when we bought the company. So I saw how he communicated with his team members. And, as business leaders, oftentimes we're pretty smart. We know a lot of business theory, a lot of business philosophy. We've studied. Most of us have degrees, maybe MBAs, and we tend to talk in that language to people. And when we do that, they simply check out. Mm-hmm. They may understand it. It's not that they aren't smart enough to get it, but it's not the language that they use. So what I was trying to do was simply use a language that we all spoke, because everybody knows how to ride a bike, right? I haven't found anybody that says they don't either know how or don't recognize how a bike works. So all I wanted to do was talk in a language that they were comfortable in, which then opened them up to say, okay, yeah, I get this. I can communicate with you now.
So when you use that metaphor and you're getting into it, what do you see when you now go into organizations where there is, perhaps not that kind of engagement, or there isn't that kind of vision? How do you start to use it, and where do you start first?
There are probably two places I start, John, and it happens everywhere that I go, every business that I work with. The first thing is, and you'll relate to this, right? When you were a kid, you rode a bike, right? As I did. And what did we do as kids? What was, to be cool riding our bikes, we would ride our bikes with no hands, right? We'd put our hands in the air. We'd ride our bikes with no hands. It made us part of the cool group to be able to do that. And the reality is, that's what business owners do today. That's what business leaders do today. They don't put their hands on the handlebars and steer their business. And the way they steer it is to paint the vision of the future and set the standards, right? Tell people where they're going, give them a compelling place, a compelling reason to be on the team. And so the first thing I see is I tell business owners, look, you got to steer the business. If you haven't made it clear to everybody what you want this business to look like in 5 years, how's anybody going to get excited about helping you make that a reality?
And the one thing that I find, I agree with you, and the one thing that I find about that, Rich, is that very often when you're working within a large corporate, in a multinational, and the vision becomes kind of very blurry and kind of not really connected to what we're doing in this particular part of the organization, whatever part that is. And one of the things I was doing working with a team recently, where we actually really sat down and said, okay, for our division, what's our mission? And now we can connect it to the organization's larger kind of mission and all of that. And it's not trying to write another mission statement, but unless that division has got a clear mission and purpose of its own, then it's not going to get that engagement. And that engagement as you say, really does transform that. But is that something that you have found that you really need even within the large corporate just to make it so much more personal to them?
Absolutely. A lot of times our corporate vision statements are designed to be impressive when it's read by a shareholder or somebody who's evaluating our company from a stock perspective. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be motivating to someone who's working in the enterprise. And a lot of times we need to just boil it down and make it really simple. I will tell you, I'll give you one clear example because this was really powerful. The technology company I worked for was Texas Instruments at the time, a fairly large electronics firm. And I remember our CEO said at one point, here's the vision. Here's what we want. The goal is to beat Motorola. And it was a 2-word vision statement, beat Motorola. And under that, he said, get to know the person that does your job at Motorola and do what you do just a little bit better than they do. And if we all do that, all 80,000 of us do that, we're going to beat them soundly. And so he took this, what typically was this mission statement or vision statement about, being the best and delivering these kinds of services and products to the whatever. He made it really practical, and he made it where I could make it personal.
Yeah.
And when he did that, everybody got on board. Everybody got fired up. It was a compelling visual.
It is, and I just find it extraordinary. I mean, I always think that another example. It's going back quite a number of years, but I always thought, and it did work for them certainly at that time. I've no experience of them in recent years, but if we look at Avis, and Hertz was number one, and Avis was We Try Harder, right? And you kind of think, is it a bit tongue in cheek? But the impact that had on that organization was quite extraordinary, because then everybody knew what it was they were meant to do. I suppose my question is to you is that, we talk about that, we say yes when we're both violently agreeing with each other. But why do you think it is that so many managers don't really tackle that and don't go near that and end up still kind of talking about the widgets and the numbers and the percentages?
I would say, in my mind, I think it's because that's what they believe is expected of them, right? Most people in a large organization look up more than they look down. And what I've found is if you want the best outcome in an organization, it's almost, you've heard of the serving leader or the servant leader model, which basically says you take the pyramid and you flip the pyramid upside down and you put yourself at the bottom and you serve the people who work for you. And I think if we were to do that a little bit more with what we intend to do and where we want the business to go, I think more of our people would realize that we're in it as leaders for their benefit. And oh, by the way, we benefit when that happens. Rather than in many cases, I think what happens is the manager is looking for them to look good and be able to be promoted. And so I think their motivation may be a little bit skewed.
Yeah. And that really does come from the top, doesn't it? Because when you look at that is a cultural thing. If the organization is spending its time kind of managing up, then it means that we're managing the politics, and we're not actually managing the people, and we're not managing the functions that we have, and we're not our mindset is not to be the driver of the vision and the mission, which I think is an awful shame. I mean, I think that's one part. The other part I want to talk about, and I know that you're into really transforming teams. I know that you're the author of the book The Ultimate Business Tune-Up, but you're very much into transformation of teams and businesses. What part does kind of creating and developing culture play in that?
I think it's the number one thing. The culture defines how the business operates from front to back. And so it's got to be That's, to me, that's part of the putting the hands on the handlebars, is you've got to be absolute about what you want the culture to be. The way that I say it, John, is that I always tell business owners, tell me what you believe is non-negotiable. What are those 5 or 6 things that simply you will not tolerate in the business? Let's start there, because that's really easy. Most of us have things that we just won't tolerate. We have a belief system. We have some fundamentals about the way we want our business to work and the way that we want to operate. And they may be things like being ethical, being safe, being transparent. There could be whatever they are. Take those, make the absolute statements about what you won't tolerate. We can always then turn those into positive statements so that they can look pretty on a wall. But I want to first know what you're willing to just lay down the gauntlet and say, I will not allow this to happen in my organization. And the clearer we can get on that, the more that we'll have people who believe and feel and think and behave like we do that want to be on our team. They want to join us because they have the same beliefs. And I think that's really where it starts.
That's really about being clear about values, isn't it? It's about behavior and values. And I mean, I've always said that, if you want to, people can talk about the culture that's in an organization. But if you actually want to know what the culture is, just, listen to the conversation that takes place. How do people speak to each other? What sort of language do they use? And that tells you everything you need to know about the culture of the organization. So if you're looking at kind of culture and behavior and vision, so what are the other parts then that you would go after if you're really looking to turn a team around? After you've dealt with those areas, what do you do next?
Well, I've heard you say in the past, John, that you believe it's 3 things, right? That you got to have the right people in the right roles, that they have to be fully aligned, and they have to work together in the right way, right? And a lot of those are culture-based criteria, I believe. But in my mind, John, it all starts with how we hire people. Mm-hmm. We either win or lose the game by who we let on the team. And the one thing that I see in a lot of organizations is that, and particularly in this world that we're in today, we're living in an environment today where the most employees have a lot of choices on where they can go to work. So we feel like we're at a disadvantage as a hiring manager to bring people on. But I believe it's important to set the standard really high and make it really difficult to get on our team. And make it so that somebody has to earn the right to get on the team, because then they'll want to stay and they'll be proud of the fact that they earned their spot on the team. And you mentioned earlier this idea about behaviors and culture, and that I so strongly believe in that, John, that I've got this. I've helped all of my clients hire in a different way. We do this thing called fit first hiring. If you look at most job postings that are in the world today, corporate or otherwise, most job postings have a long list of skill requirements that you need and all the things that you either must possess or can't do on the job. And it's all skill-based. Yet 95% of the people who don't work in a particular job, it has nothing to do with their skill. It has everything to do with their behaviors. So why don't we start hiring based on behaviors and then teach the skill that we need? And I think it would transform.
How do you go about doing that, Rich? Because I know that from your website that you do work with clients to actually help them do that. And I couldn't agree with you more, because I think that, if you like the knowledge and the skill, I mean, okay, there's a certain kind of hygiene factor that you got to have and knowledge that you got to have in order to be able to function within the organization, and depending on the different types of roles. But beyond that, you can teach somebody a lot of what you actually need them to know. What's harder to teach is their behavior, their way of going, their values. All of that is tougher. How do you get the fit as good as you possibly can in that interviewing process?
I've got this fairly elaborate hiring process that we use, but it all starts, and it really is a little bit awkward if no one's done this before. It doesn't start with what you need in the job. It starts with the culture that you want, and the behaviors you want to see in your business. And sometimes managers and leaders have to really think that through to come to that list of the behaviors they want to see in their business, because they've really never articulated it before. So I make them do that, and then we write the job posting as if we're doing a marketing ad for our product or service. Think about that. We don't typically post for our positions with a marketing hat on. We're trying to screen out all those people that we don't want to apply for the job. I like to flip that around. I'd like to make it a marketing piece where we tell everybody, here's how good we are as a company. Here's the kind of people you'll work with, and then have a flood of people come in, and then we can sort and sift our way to those that are the best at it. And what I've found is when you take that approach, it's unbelievable what you uncover when you don't use skills as your limiting factor early in the hiring process.
Right. Okay, and that's really interesting. And does that make the process a longer process for people to go through? And secondly, do people feel, gosh, this is an unusual way of going about being interviewed?
It is. It does make it very much longer. I probably use 6 or 7 steps in the process. People have to go through a lot of different wickets. They end up in a room with all of their all the other people, the top candidates who are competing for the job. We do a group interview, but we do it where all the top candidates are there and they can see each other face to face. Most people would shy away, and many do, and they say, geez, I'm not ready to do that. And my thought is, look, I want the person who's willing to go through all of the wickets. I want them to sacrifice to get on this team. Because what I find is when they do that, and they finally make it over that high bar that we placed in front of them, they're so proud to be there that they become an advocate from day one.
And I mean, based on what you've been doing, how long have you been doing that process? How long have you been at that?
Well, we've been using this process about 6 or 7 years.
Okay, so what sort of results are you getting for that in terms of retention or longevity?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Because then what we do, it's really been fantastic. Because then what we do, as soon as we do that a couple of times and we get some people on the team who have been through the process, then we include them in the hiring process. So they're the ones selecting their peers. My goal would be to have the manager be hands off, or be at the very end of the process and let everybody in the business do all the hard work to figure out who are the top 2 or 3 candidates that they want to work with. Because what I find, again, is when people are invested in the people that they're bringing on, they're going to help them be successful rather than feeling like they're a threat.
Great process. And so you manage that process from beginning to end, do you?
We manage the process up until we get to the last few candidates, the top candidates, right. And then we let the hiring manager make the selection from there.
I mean, it's a really interesting way of doing it. One of the things that just as a question on that, and it's just to relate it back to something that I've discovered, is that, and you mentioned at the very beginning, we're talking about hiring people, is that the market that we're in right now, is a pretty hot market. So,
right.
The package and the financial package that they're, if they're not going to get it with you, they kind of feel, well, I can walk down the road to me and they can get it, So, I mean, that's the financial package tends to be a bit of a hygiene factor. And what they're really looking for is, well, which organization am I going to be engaged with and grow with, and that I'm going to get the opportunity to develop and grow and become better, because they're not looking at staying for 25, 30 years. And that model is just completely different. My question that I'm coming to is that with the issue that I have found in some organizations is that those people are joining organizations with that mindset, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think it's quite healthy. But they're being managed by people that don't actually have the same mindset.
Right.
That they're actually more accustomed to the older model of right. kind of employment. And how do you manage to get the manager to make the transition because it's the manager's got to change, not the joining person's got to change.
John, that is a fantastic point, and I think that's probably what keeps many people from truly taking the leap and going at it this new way of hiring, because their mindset is people ought to come, stay, and have a career there without being enticed, without them having to do the things to show how big an opportunity this is in the future. I think managers, and so, in some cases, if managers that way and they really don't, they are stuck in the old mindset, it's likely not to work.
Yeah.
They must change. They can't fake it. But when they do, and they start to make it really difficult, challenging for someone to come in, and then they put them alongside a mentor, and they give them a mentor from the day one that they start with them, so that they know that they've got somebody who is higher in the organization, who's looking out for their best interests and going to help them excel and progress faster, and show them a vision of where they want the company to go and where they want their organization to be in the future, so they can actually see a role on the org chart that is of interest to them, that's 2 or 3 levels above where they're at. If they were to do those things, and when they do those things, you get people that get really energized about being with that company.
Yeah. But it is that shift, isn't it? In some of the senior levels in organizations, and I see that's where some of the struggle is happening, because and that's why they're getting a turn in terms of turning people over and not retaining people. And there's a level of turnover that's perfectly healthy, and that's just going to be a fact of life. But when it gets to that we're just losing them badly, then it's a real waste and a huge cost to an organization. And therefore, I think that for a lot of the work that I see that I'm doing in organizations is actually helping those managers shift their way of thinking in order to develop and grow the people that are coming in. And I think that's an important area.
I totally agree with you, John, and I would tell you that here the only thing I would say is you can't shortcut that.
No.
You can't shortcut the belief of the senior leadership. They've got to be on board with it, or the whole thing is a house of cards. People will see right through it, and it won't take long, and they'll recognize that they were sold a bill of goods, and you don't want that.
Yeah. I also remember a number of years ago being invited in by the CEO of an organization, and his opening line was pretty much, he said, I really don't like the culture of my middle management team. So can you fix it? Right? I said, we better fix your lot first, because they're that way because of you lot. So if we don't fix your team, you and your team, there's no point in working with the other team. And I think that's
right. The root canal starts here. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Rich, listen, we could go on because this is a really good conversation, and perhaps we should come back and talk about, because I'd love to. And I do think we should come back and talk about this whole process of kind of how you onboard people, because obviously that's an area that you have a lot of experience in, and I think that people would really benefit from that. But just to respect the time that we agreed today, before we kind of tell people where they can get in touch with you, a book other than your own, and I know you are the author of your own book, The Ultimate Business Tune-Up, but a book that has had a significant impact upon you.
I'll have to share this book. I don't know, John, that many people have seen it or read it. It's a book titled The Road Less Stupid, and it was written by Keith Cunningham. And I don't know whether many people may not know who Keith Cunningham is, but many people probably have heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and Robert Kiyosaki. Keith Cunningham was actually his rich dad. And he's a very, very brilliant business strategist who lives in Austin, Texas. And he wrote this book that is absolutely chock full of all the mistakes that we've all made as leaders in business. And he lays out how to avoid the road that's more stupid so that you can be on the road that's less stupid. I love the book.
That's not one that I've come across before, so that's definitely going on the list. So I'm delighted.
It needs to go on the list. It's one I give it to every business owner I work with.
Oh, that's great.
Brilliant
I must
book.
actually get that. That's super, and I love the reason why. And I didn't know that backstory about Robert Kiyosaki. That's really interesting. Second question I ask is that I'm fascinated by rituals. I've spent years kind of developing and honing my own because I so passionately believe, and I've learned from lots of other people the value of rituals. So, do you have any, and what are they?
I do have a ritual. I have a morning ritual that I will not violate. My morning ritual is I get up, I have some prayer time, I do a Bible study verse myself. I have a book that I read every morning, and so I do that for about a half an hour, and then I spend about 30 minutes journaling. So every morning I get up and I journal what's on my day, what were my reflections from yesterday, what am I grateful for? And it's only when I get done with that I then have 2 or 3 podcasts that I listen to that are more inspirational podcasts so that I can start the day well. And it's only then that I get up and really start my day.
Fantastic. And that you say that's absolutely non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. If I have an early morning meeting, I just set the alarm clock for earlier, and I leave myself at least an hour and 15 minutes to go through my startup ritual. When I get done with that, I'm fired up and ready to attack anything in the day, and I know what the big priorities are, so I'm more likely to get them done during the day.
That's brilliant. I love that. I really do. I love that. That is fantastic. Rich, this has been a real pleasure, and we definitely will come back again. But where can people kind of reach out and find you?
They've got 2 options. One is we put together a page for your listeners. It's on my website. It's called tourdeprofit.com. So TOURDEPROFIT.com. You're in France, so you know Tour de France. Well, it's just tourdeprofit.com. /winning, WINNING. So we put some resources there, some free resources. You'll find them. Hopefully they're packaged in a way that people could use them. If your listeners are Facebook fans, I've also got a private Facebook group. It's called Join the Peloton. One word, Join the Peloton. I use a cycling term. A peloton is a group of riders riding together. We go faster together. So it's for business owners and business leaders only. And we're just solving business challenges, trying to go faster. It's just a group of business owners doing it together socially.
Brilliant. Well, listen, that all will be in the notes as well, so people can catch up with it there. But Rich, I really want to thank you for doing this today. It's been a huge pleasure, and I look forward to kind of coming back and doing another one.
Let's do it, John. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.